August 14th, 1945, Salinas Valley, California. The canvas-covered trucks lurched to a stop beside the river. 50 Japanese women pressed against the sides, their fingers clutching the hot fabric. Through the gaps they could see the wide, slow-moving water glinting under the merciless afternoon sun. Someone screamed first, then another, then all of them at once. Before we continue with this extraordinary story of terror, misunderstanding, and unexpected mercy, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, whether you're in Tokyo, New York, or anywhere in between. These forgotten stories of World War II deserve to be remembered, and your support helps us bring them to light. The women in those trucks believed they had seconds to live. They had been told the Americans were monsters, that capture meant torture, that no mercy would be shown to enemy nationals. And now, as soldiers unlocked the tailgates and pointed toward the river, they knew with absolute certainty this was execution. But the Americans weren't pointing guns toward the water. They were pointing toward a long wooden building on the riverbank. Steam rose from its roof. A smell of soap drifted on the breeze. The sound of running water echoed from within. They weren't building a death site. They were building a bathhouse. And that realization, when it finally came, would shatter everything these women thought. They knew about their captors, about the war, about themselves. To understand that moment of terror beside the river, we must go back 3 months to the spring of 1945, when these 50 women were still living in the ruins of Manila. Most had been nurses, teachers, merchants' wives who had followed their husbands when Japan occupied the Philippines in 1942. They had believed in the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, in Japan's divine mission and ultimate victory. Then came the American counteroffensive. The Battle of Manila turned the city into an inferno. Artillery shells rained down without cease. Buildings collapsed into rubble. Fire consumed entire neighborhoods. The women huddled in cellars, listening to the thunder of war creeping closer, knowing capture was inevitable. When American forces swept through their district in March, the women emerged from the ruins hollow-eyed, filthy, wearing whatever tattered clothes they had preserved. The soldiers who found them were not the monsters they expected. They were young men, exhausted and weary. They searched the women for weapons, confiscated military items, loaded them onto transport trucks. The women expected immediate execution. Instead, they were taken to a processing camp. They received medical examinations, a meal of rice and canned meat, a numbered tag tied to their wrists. Yoko, a former school teacher from Osaka who had moved to Manila with her merchant husband in 1942, kept a secret diary. She wrote that first day in cramped characters on scraps of paper hidden in her clothes. "We are alive. I do not understand why. The soldiers gave us food. Real food. My hands shake as I write this. Is this mercy, or are they fattening us for some worse fate?" The journey from the Philippines to California took nearly 3 weeks aboard a military transport ship. The women were held in converted cargo holds cramped, but not inhumanly so. They slept on narrow bunks stacked 3 high, the metal frames creaking with every roll of the vessel. Seasickness ravaged them. The hold smelled of vomit, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of fear. Through portholes they glimpsed endless ocean, gray and hostile. The ship's crew provided regular meals, hardtack biscuits, canned vegetables, occasionally meat. After months of near starvation in Manila, Even these plain rations felt surreal. Some women refused to eat, convinced the food was poisoned or drugged. Others ate ravenously, their bodies overriding their minds' suspicions. Yoko noted, "The contradiction is maddening. If they plan to kill us, why feed us? If they plan to keep us alive, for what purpose? We are enemy nationals. We have no value to them." During the voyage, the women formed tight clusters. The nurses grouped together. The teachers formed another circle. The merchants' wives a third. They spoke in hushed Japanese, sharing rumors, fears, memories of home. Some had children who had been separated from them, sons and daughters sent to different camps or facilities. The agony of not knowing their children's fates gnawed at them constantly. A few women had lost husbands in the fighting. Their grief was quiet, internal, dangerous to express openly. When the ship finally docked in San Francisco Bay in late June, the women caught their first glimpse of America. The sight staggered them. The city rose from the waterfront completely intact, no rubble, no bomb craters, no burned-out shells of buildings. Street lights glowed in the evening. Cars moved along roads. People walked freely. It was as if the war existed only in photographs. One woman whispered, "How can this be? We were told America was suffering, starving, dying. This looks like paradise." From San Francisco, they traveled by train to the Salinas Valley, about 100 miles south. The train windows revealed an America that seemed impossible. Farms bursting with crops. Towns with shops full of goods, children playing in parks. Women in bright dresses laughing on street corners. Every mile drove home the same devastating truth: their homeland had lied. Japan was ash and ruin. America was abundance and life. The propaganda had been backwards, completely, utterly backwards. The internment camp at Salinas was housed in converted farm buildings on the edge of the valley. Barbed wire surrounded the compound. Guard towers stood at the corners. But the barracks were weatherproof, tight, and clean. Each woman received a narrow cot, a thin mattress, 2 wool blankets, and a footlocker. It was sparse, institutional, but it was shelter. That first night, lying on an actual bed for the first time in months, several women wept from the simple relief of it. The camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, addressed them the next morning through an interpreter. He explained the rules: roll call twice daily, work assignments for those who were able, access to medical care, letters permitted once weekly. He mentioned the Geneva Convention, a term most of the women had never heard. "You are prisoners of war," he said, his voice firm but not cruel. "But you will be treated with dignity according to international law. You will not be mistreated. You will not be starved. You will not be executed. That is my promise." The women did not believe him. How could they? Everything they had been taught about Americans screamed that this was a temporary illusion. The cruelty would come. It always came. They simply had to wait for it. Which brings us back to that August afternoon, 6 weeks after their arrival, when the trucks appeared and guards ordered the women to board. No explanation, no context, just curt commands in English and pointed fingers toward the vehicles. The women climbed in, hearts hammering, exchanging terrified glances. This was it, the moment they had been dreading. Whatever kindness had been shown was about to end. The ride felt endless, though it lasted under half an hour. The trucks were stifling, the canvas trapping August heat. Sweat soaked their thin dresses. Some women prayed, others clutched hands. Yoko stared through a gap, trying to memorize orchards, mountains, sky something beautiful, if these were her last moments. When the trucks stopped, silence hung, then the unmistakable roar of a river. Soldiers approached the tailgates. Terror surged. They had heard of mass drownings, prisoners tossed into currents and erased. Yuki screamed first, "They're going to drown us." Panic spread. Women sobbed, scrambled. At the front, Sakiko began to hyperventilate. The American soldiers stopped, confused by the sudden panic. One of them, a young corporal from Nebraska, climbed onto the tailgate and held up his hands. Hey, calm down. Nobody's hurting you. It's just a bathhouse. See?" He pointed toward the wooden structure on the riverbank. But the women didn't speak English, couldn't understand his words, saw only his gestures toward the water. The panic intensified. An interpreter was summoned, a Japanese-American soldier from the 442nd Regimental Combat Team assigned to the camp. He climbed into the truck, speaking rapidly in Japanese, trying to cut through the hysteria. "Listen to me, please. You are not in danger. They have built a bathhouse. A proper bathhouse with hot water and soap. This is for bathing, nothing else. I promise you on my honor, you are safe." The words penetrated slowly. The screaming subsided into whimpers, then into stunned silence. The women stared at the interpreter, trying to process what he was saying. A bathhouse. For them, Yoko was the first to speak, her voice shaking. "Why would they build us a bathhouse? We are prisoners. We are the enemy. Why would they waste resources on our comfort?" The interpreter smiled sadly. "Because the Geneva Convention requires it. And because this is how America treats prisoners of war with basic human dignity." The women climbed down from the trucks slowly, as if in a dream. Their legs trembled. Some had to be helped by others. They approached the bathhouse cautiously, still half expecting a trap. The building was simple but sturdy rough-cut lumber, a sloped roof, windows on the sides. Steam rose from vents along the roofline. The smell that hit them as they neared the entrance was almost overwhelming. Soap. Real soap. Clean, fresh, impossibly luxurious. Inside, the bathhouse was divided into sections, a changing area with wooden benches and hooks on the walls, a washing area with individual stations equipped with buckets and stools, and a large communal bathing pool filled with steaming water. The design was deliberately similar to traditional Japanese bathhouses, something the Army Corps of Engineers had researched to make the facility culturally appropriate. The detail that someone had cared about their customs struck the women harder than anything else. Lieutenant Roberts, an Army nurse, explained through an interpreter. Each woman would get soap, a towel, and a clean camp dress. They would wash at individual stations, then soak in the communal pool. Their old clothes would be laundered and returned the next day. Her tone was routine. Nothing about this felt routine to the women. For 6 weeks they had washed from cold buckets with harsh lye soap. In Manila, they had gone weeks without bathing at all. Now they stood in a real bathhouse, with hot water and proper soap. The shock froze them. Yoko undressed first, not from courage, but disbelief. When she lifted the lavender-scented bar of soap, tears streamed down her face. Others followed. Soon the room filled with quiet crying, the scrape of benches, the splash of warm water turning gray at their feet. Some washed themselves again and again, unable to believe no one would stop them. The communal pool held all 50 women. They entered slowly, sinking into the steaming water with stunned expressions. Some laughed nervously. Others sat still, eyes closed. Yuki floated on her back, whispering, "I thought we were going to die. And instead they gave us this." Miko muttered that it must be a trick, though she didn't sound sure. After nearly an hour, they stepped out reluctantly, wrapped in clean towels, dressed in pale blue camp dresses. Without dirt, their faces looked younger, almost soft. On the truck ride back, a fragile silence settled. Women touched their clean hair, rubbing their smooth arms in disbelief. Yoko held the bar of soap she'd been allowed to keep, staring at it as if it were an object she could not interpret. That night, the bathhouse was all anyone discussed. Propaganda, kindness, or something impossible to understand. In her diary, Yoko wrote, "I prepared to die today. Instead, I was given hot water and soap. If the enemy cares whether we are clean, then what does that mean about everything we believed?" The bathhouse visits became weekly events. Every Saturday, weather permitting, the trucks would arrive and transport groups of women to the river. The terror of that first trip never fully repeated, though some women remained anxious each time. But gradually the bathhouse transformed from a source of fear into something stranger and more troubling, a highlight of their week, a moment of comfort they began to anticipate with guilty pleasure. Between those Saturday trips, camp life settled into a routine that was at once mundane and surreal. Reveille came at 6, announced by a bugle that echoed across the compound. The women rose, made their bunks with military precision, a requirement that felt absurd but was strictly enforced, and lined up for morning roll call. A guard walked the rows each morning, calling out numbers from a clipboard. The women answered, "Hi, yes." Being counted meant they hadn't vanished, a reassurance that felt both comforting and disturbing. Breakfast followed, and the mess hall oatmeal or cream of wheat, toast, occasional eggs, always terrible coffee. "As if we are guests at a mediocre hotel," Yoko observed in her diary. Work assignments filled the day's laundry, kitchen duty, sewing, maintenance. They were paid in small tokens redeemable at the camp canteen, a wooden building and probably stocked with chocolate, cigarettes, writing paper, even lipstick. Yuki saved for weeks to buy a single Hershey bar, sharing it square by square with her bunkmates, each piece a small reclamation of humanity. They wrote weekly letters through the Red Cross, censored and slow. Yoko wrote her mother in Osaka every Tuesday, careful neutral sentences about health and weather. Months passed before a thin envelope arrived, her mother's handwriting shaky but recognizable. She was alive but starving, the letter said between carefully worded lines. Yoko placed a letter under her pillow and couldn't eat dinner that night. The women gained weight under the regime of regular meals, a transformation that felt like betrayal. How could they be healthier, stronger, while their families starved? Some refused food in protest, but the camp doctor, an older man with kind eyes, threatened force-feeding. "Your suffering won't help them," he said through the interpreter. "It only wastes what you've been given." Guards remained mostly distant, professional, but a few showed disarming kindness. Private Cooper from Tennessee brought extra bread from the kitchen. Sergeant Wallace, who had Japanese friends before the war, learned basic phrases to say good morning and thank you. Corporal Johnson showed them photographs of his wife and infant daughter, bridging the vast divide with the universal language of family. These small gestures confused the women more than cruelty would have. Cruelty they understood. Kindness from the enemy made no sense. Then came August 6, 1945. The camp was unusually quiet that morning. Guards spoke in hushed clusters. The commander's office door remained closed all day. Rumors spread like wildfire. Something had happened in Japan, something terrible. The women gathered in anxious groups, but no official word came. It wasn't until the next day that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison called an assembly. Through the interpreter, he explained what had occurred. A new weapon, he said. A single bomb. An entire city, Hiroshima, destroyed in an instant. Tens of thousands dead, perhaps more. The numbers were still being counted. The women stood in stunned silence. Some began to weep. Others seemed unable to process the information. One city, one bomb, tens of thousands dead. How could that be possible? 3 days later came the news of Nagasaki. Then, on August 15th, the announcement they had never truly believed would come: Japan had surrendered. The war was over. The women gathered around the camp radio as the interpreter translated the emperor's speech, his voice thin and crackling across the distance. He spoke of enduring the unendurable, bearing the unbearable. He spoke of a new bomb of devastating power. He did not speak of victory or honor, only of survival. When the speech ended, silence filled the recreation hall. Then Sekiko began to sob deep, broken sobs, and others followed. Some cried from grief, some from relief, some from a confusion too deep to name. Yoko did not. That night she sat on her bunk, lavender soap in her hands, trying to understand. The war was over. Japan had lost. She was still a prisoner, yet alive, fed, and gaining weight, while her family might be starving or gone. The contradictions were impossible to resolve. In the following weeks, the camp slowly emptied. Some women were repatriated. Others, like Yoko, had no confirmed family or home to return to. They remained no longer quite prisoners, but refugees in limbo. The Saturday bathhouse ritual continued. The women soaked away dust and fear, now talking more openly about the future. Yuki learned her parents had survived and would return to Japan with extra bars of soap gifted for your family. Even skeptical, Miko eventually admitted it wasn't a trick. They could have left us sick and broken, but they didn't. Yoko left in December 1945, returning to a ruined Japan. She reunited with her mother in an Osaka shelter. When asked if she'd been mistreated, Yoko showed her the worn lavender soap. "They built us a bathhouse," she said. Every week, her mother stared. Why? Yoko could only say, "I don't know." Years later, her diary revealed the truth she struggled with. They expected monsters and found mercy instead, a bathhouse where they'd expected death, a small act of humanity that shattered everything she thought she knew about war.